Assalamu alaikum, dear students of class ninth. Dear students, today we will discuss how the compounds are formed. As we know that compounds are formed from elements when two or more than two elements combine together, they form compound. So compounds may be formed by two ways. When one of the element loses its valence electron and another gain its valence electron. This is one way by which the elements are the compounds are formed. Second way is by the sharing of electrons between the two elements. Mostly we know that metals they lose electron. They have a tendency to lose electron, and non-metals have a tendency to gain the electrons. So in the compound formation, the chemical reaction is involved, and in the chemical reaction the valence electrons of the elements take part in the chemical reaction. The rest of the inner elements they do not take part in the chemical reaction. Dear students, as we know that element is basically made up of the atoms, and atoms have a spherical structure like this, having a nucleus in its center, and then there are shells. First shell is K shell, then another L, M shell, N shell likewise. And we know that the protons and electrons are bound within the nucleus, as we have already discussed it in the structure of atom, and these electrons they are moving outside the nucleus in definite orbits, which we called as shells, and these shells may be K shell, L shell, M shell, N shell, etc. And these electrons are distributed in these shells. The first shell holds 2 electrons, second shell holds 8 electrons, third shell 16. So this is called as the electronic configuration, distribution of electrons in the different shells. So in a chemical reaction, only the outer valence electrons, the electrons that are in the valence shell, only those electrons take part in the chemical reaction. Those electrons are either lost by the element and another gains the element with which the chemical compound is formed. The another way is that these valence electrons they are shared between the two elements. So dear students, we may say that chemical compounds are formed either by the loss and gain of valence electrons or by the sharing of valence electrons between the two or more elements. Those compounds which are formed by the complete transfer of valence electrons from one element to another element, or those compounds which are formed by the loss and gain of valence electrons, such elements or such compounds are called as ionic compounds. Such compounds are called as ionic compounds. And those compounds which are formed as a result of sharing of electrons between the two elements, such compounds are called as covalent compounds. So dear students, on the basis of the chemical bonding in the elements, we have two types of compounds. One is covalent compound and another is ionic compound. So covalent compound is that compound which is formed as a result of sharing of electrons between the two elements, and this ionic compound is formed by the complete transfer of one or more electrons, valence electrons from one element to another element. That is the compound so formed is called as ionic compounds. So, dear students, as we know that the element is made up of atoms, and atoms have electrons, protons, neutrons, and these electrons they are in the valence shell. The outer the shell, the electrons that are present in the outer shell, they are called as the valence electrons, and only these valence electrons take part in a chemical reaction. So, dear students, these valence electrons, when completely transported by one element and are accepted by the another element, such type of compounds are called as ionic compounds. In the ionic compounds, the force between the two, the force between the two elements in a chemical compound, that is called as the bond, that is called as the chemical bond. So, dear students, the chemical bond is basically the force of attraction between the two or more elements in a compound. If the force exists in the uh, between in the covalent compounds, such type of bond is called as a covalent bond. And if the force of attraction between the different elements is in an ionic compound, ionic compounds are also called as the electrovalent compounds. Such types of bonds is called as the ionic bond. So ionic bond is a very strong bond, and covalent bond is a very weak bond. So, dear students, now we have to learn how a chemical bond is formed in a compound, or we can say how the covalent bond is formed between the elements, how the ionic bond is formed between the elements. Dear students, stay connected. In the next video, we will discuss how the ionic compounds are formed.